Squeeze, don't pull. The metal is so cold, it bites back. My cheeks pressed hard against the wood. No, it's walnut, smooth and scarred from a dozen marches of the Lee Enfield. It smells of Rangoon oil, old sweat, and that faint, sharp tang of cordite that never really leaves your skin. Through the glass, through the reticle, the world is just a wash of grays and dirty whites. But there's this one spot of life. A German, just a boy, really, standing out there in the middle of no man's land, like he's in his own backyard on a Sunday morning. He's stripped down to his undershirt, his skin looking pale and blue in the frost, and he's holding a little shaven mirror. It catches the light, a sharp, blinding flash that cuts right through the morning mist. He's looking up at the pale sky, seeking out a bit of warmth from a sun that hasn't shown its face in a week. He's turning his chin, real slow, scraping away the stubble with a straight razor. He's humming. I can see his throat moving. See the way he's just... well, he's just a man. Right behind me, I can hear the lieutenant's watch. Tick, tick, tick. It's a rhythmic, hammering sound that gets right inside your skull, like a clock counting down the seconds to a hanging. He's looking at the dial. His breath is huffing out in little white clouds of peppermint and stale tea. The order comes. Fire! Just one syllable. Short, sharp, deadly. Should be easy. I've done it 100 times. Pull the trigger. Watch the recoil. See the target fold. But my finger, it's numb. Can't feel the curve of the steel. It's like it don't belong to me no more. And it ain't just me neither. You can feel it. A heavy, suffocating weight along the whole damn line. 300 men, 300 rifles, all aimed, all ready, but nobody's shooting. It's an unnatural silence, deeper than any grave I've ever dug in this mud. The mud, well, it's frozen solid, hard as iron, and it itches. You know, the lice. They don't care about the war. They just keep biting into your collar, crawling under your wool tunic. I can taste the stale remains of breakfast, hardtack and watery jam, bitter on my tongue. The lieutenant, his face is turning a nasty shade of purple. He's looking at the line, then at the boy in the scope, then at the watch, the machine. It's catching a gear. It's grinding, trying to turn, but we're the cogs, and we've just, stopped. He screams it this time. Fire! God damn you! Fire! His voice is thin, brittle, like ice breaking on a frozen puddle. But nobody pulls. Nobody moves. We're just watching that boy. Watching him shave. Watching him be a person instead of a target. It's a paradox. You know, a 5-second glitch in the soul of the world. We're looking at our own reflection in that little shaven mirror, seeing the humanity we're supposed to bury under the dirt. If I don't pull this trigger, well, the lieutenant, he's got a Webley. He'll put a hole in my head for cowardice. That's the system. That's the machine. But right now, all I can hear is the frost cracking on the wire and the sound of my own heart thudding against my ribs. Squeeze. Don't pull, but the finger won't mind. The individual, he's just catching the sun, while we're catching the devil. Funny how small things stick with you. Like the way he wiped the lather off on his sleeve. So human it hurts. The machine is screaming for a body, but for one, long breath, we're just keeping the silence. The general, He was miles back at that chateau in Saint Omer, safe and sound behind stone walls that smelled of expensive scotch and floor wax. Far away from the gray slush we called home, and he didn't like what he was hearing from the wires. He had those maps, big, crisp sheets of paper that didn't have a single drop of blood on 'em yet, and he'd move these little wooden blocks around as if we were just pieces in a game. But the reports, they started coming in sour. Unusual quiet. Lack of engagement. Enemy seen waving. Well, the machine, that great war engine we were all fed into, it don't like quiet. It needs the gears to grind. It needs the friction of lead against bone to keep the heart of the empire beating. I heard he hit that oak table so hard the crystal glasses rattled like teeth. A solid, heavy thud that probably made the orderlies jump out of their skins. And he's screaming about treason until his face turned the color of a bruised plum. To a man like that, a soldier not killing is a soldier stealing from the crown. And he didn't have no patience for thieves. So he picked up a pen, a fancy fountain pen with a gold nib, and he signed it. The banned order. It wasn't just a piece of paper. No, it was a death warrant delivered by boys on motorbikes who didn't even know they were carrying a plague in their saddlebags. The order was simple, brutal, the kind of thing that turns your stomach into a knot of cold lead. It said that fraternization, that's their fancy word for treating a man like a man, was a capital offense. And it said if you don't aim to kill, if you're the cold rifle stays cold when the target is clear, then you're a coward. And cowards, well, they don't get a medal. They get the wall. 300 of us. We were just standing there, knee-deep in that foul, sulfurous muck, waiting for the mist to lift. But the mist, it wasn't the enemy no more. It was the men behind us, the red tabs, the officers with the clean collars and the loaded Webleys. You could feel the eyes on your back, pressing into your shoulder blades, making you want to crawl into the dirt just to hide. Jack, he was right next to me. His hands were shaking so hard his bayonet was making this tiny, frantic clink, clink, clink against the muzzle of his Enfield. A sound that seemed louder than a barrage in that awful silence. And we were caught in a vice, you know. German Mausers in front, British firing squads in back, and the machine was just starting to turn the screws. The tension, it was like a wire pulled so tight you could hear it humming in the wind. Then, out of that gray, choking fog, something flies through the air, a dark, heavy, little lump. It didn't whistle like a grenade. It didn't hiss. It just landed with a soft, wet thump in the frozen mud right at Jack's boots. We all stopped, breathing. Every man along the line just froze. And Jack, he looks down, his eyes wide and glassy, and he reaches out. His fingers, they were blue and cracked from the frost, looking like dead twigs. And he picks it up. It's bread, a hunk of pumpernickel, hard as a brick and probably tastes like sawdust and old yeast. But Jack, he holds it like it's a diamond. He can smell it, that earthy, sour, beautiful smell of a kitchen, of a life before the mud. And I remember the way his mouth watered. Just a bit of spit on his lip. A human reaction in a place that had forgotten what humans were. And that's when the silence broke. But it wasn't a shell. It was the sound of a hammer cocking back on a Webley. Click, clack. Our captain, a man who'd led us through the Marne, a man we'd seen cry over a dead horse just a month back. He's standing right behind Jack. His face white as a sheet, and his eyes, well, They weren't looking at Jack at all. They were looking at the order. He puts that barrel, that cold, oily, black barrel, right against Jack's temple. Right where you could see the pulse jumping under the skin, like a trapped bird trying to get out. The smell of the cordite on the cold rifle, the smell of the bread in Jack's hand, they mixed together in the wind, and for a second, the whole world it just stopped turning. Jack didn't drop the bread. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, caught in the theater of war. But the script was gone. The captain's hand was shaken, just enough for me to see the tremor in the steel. But he didn't lower it. "Drop it," he whispers. And his voice, well, it sounded thin, brittle, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Drop it, or you're a traitor, Jack." He just looked out at no man's land, looking at the German trench where that bread had come from, and he didn't say a word. The machine was screaming for a body. It was demanding a sacrifice to reset the hate. And here we were, 300 souls caught between the hunger and the cold rifle. The mud, well, it felt like it was pulling us down, swallowing us before we were even dead. And I could taste the copper in my mouth, that metallic tang of fear you get when you know the next second is going to change everything. The captain's thumb was on the hammer, and you could see the tension in the spring, ready to snap, ready to blow Jack's brains into the mud, to satisfy a general miles away. And the Germans, they were just watching, silent ghosts in the mist, waiting to see if the machine was going to eat its own today. I remember a tiny crumb falling off the bread onto Jack's wool tunic, a small, white speck of peace in a world of rot. And we weren't a battalion no more. We were just targets, waiting for the first shot. And we didn't know if it was coming from the front or the back. The wind, it just kept whistling through the barbed wire, sounding like a dying flute. And the captain, he just kept holding that trigger, waiting for the machine to tell him what to do next. It's the mundane horror of it, the way a piece of bread becomes a death warrant because someone in a chateau decided that human beings weren't part of the plan. Jack's eyes, they were fixed on the horizon, looking for the sun that never came, while the cold steel of our own army was pressed against his skin, waiting for the silence to break, waiting for the war to start all over again in the blood of its own men. The night, well, it's got a way of making the silence feel like it's weighing a ton, especially when you're crouched in a hole that's more soup than soil. And the only thing keeping your heart from quitting is the fact that the other fella, the one in the field gray tunic 50 yards away, he's just as cold and miserable as you are. We didn't call it a truce. No, that's a word for diplomats and men with clean fingernails. We called it live and let live. It wasn't about liking each other. It was about survival. A secret civilization built right here in the rot, a system of unwritten rules that kept us from turning into ghosts before our time. You see, the machine, that big clanking monster run by the brass back in the rear, it wanted us to be killing every second of every hour. But a man can't live like that. Not when he's shivering so hard his teeth feel like they're going to crack. So we made a deal. Not with words, but with the absence of them. If we didn't shell their breakfast, well, they didn't shell ours. 8 in the morning. That was the hour of the tea. The smell of that stale, watery, bitter brew would drift out of our trench, and you'd hear the clatter of their mess tins from over the wire. We'd stand up, just enough to stretch, and nobody fired, not a single shot. You could see him, Fritz, washing his face in a puddle or shaking out a blanket, and he'd look right at you, and you'd look right at him, and then you'd both go back to waiting. A jiao uk, no, a pact, written in the mud and the silence. The water carriers, they were the most sacred. You ever try to lug 2 heavy pails of water through a trench that's half-frozen slush? Your lungs burn. Your arms feel like they're being pulled out of their sockets. And you're a sitting duck. But they didn't shoot. And we didn't either. A secret world, a hidden clock where we all agreed to stop time. But the machine? It don't like silence. Silence don't look good on a map. Silence don't win medals for the fellas in the chateaus who've never felt the itch of a louse crawling across their ribs. I remember the tea. It always tasted like tin and wood smoke, and I remember the way the lice would start to bite the second you sat down to rest. They were the only ones still fighting, always busy. We'd sit there in the dark, listening to the thud of the artillery miles away, and we'd whisper, not about the war, but about the things we missed. The smell of rain on a dusty road, the sound of a woman's laugh, the way the light hits a kitchen table at dusk, and across the no man's land, we knew they were doing the same. A secret civilization, a ghost world under the ground. But the high command, they started getting suspicious. They saw the reports. 0 casualties in Sector 4, no ammunition expended. They saw a loy hathong, a system error. To them, we weren't men trying to stay sane. We were parts that weren't working. I saw a report once. Smelled of expensive tobacco and that antiseptic scent of a general's office. And it was full of hate. Not for the Germans, but for the silence. They picked up those fountain pens, those gold-nibbed, scratchy little daggers, and they signed the banned order. It's funny how a man with a pen is more dangerous than a man with a Mauser. That pen, it signed our humanity away. They sent the butchers, the inspectors, to make sure the killing was real. We could hear the scratch of those pens all the way in the mud. It sounded like a rat gnawing on a bone. The order was clear: search and destroy. Fraternization is death. Every time a pencil scratched across a ledger back at HQ, another man's life was forfeit. We'd hear 'em coming, the brass with their polished boots and their eyes like cold glass, and we'd have to start the theater again. But the fear, it wasn't the enemy in front anymore. The machine behind. The metallic taste of it stayed on your tongue, like sucking on a copper penny. We were trapped between the two. In the night, we'd hear the Germans whistling, a low, mournful tune that drifted through the barbed wire, and we knew they'd heard the rumors too. The machine was starting to turn the screws. The live and let live was dying, and in its place was the banned order, waiting like a hangman's noose in the dark. You'd look at the tea in your tin, cold and oily, and you'd realize that the only thing keeping you human was a secret that was about to be found out. The silence was getting brittle, ready to snap, and we were just waiting for the first shot to break the world again. Funny how you miss the silence once the screaming starts. But in that trench, in the dark, we knew the pact was fading, and the machine was just getting hungry. The brass, well, they were finally coming down the line with their starched collars and their clipboards and those cold, fishy eyes, looking for blood, looking for the mountain of bodies the reports said weren't there. We knew it. We could feel the machine pressing against our backs, demanding a harvest. We had to give them a show, a theater of war, or the machine was going to start turning its teeth on us. So we fired. Lord, did we fire? The noise? It was enough to wake the dead, but the dead, they stayed alive that day. We aimed 2 meters high, always 2 meters, just enough to send the lead whistling harmlessly over their heads like a flock of angry invisible leadbirds. The stinging smell of cordite was everywhere, choking the air, burning the back of your throat with that metallic, sharp tang that stays for days. The smoke, it was so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. And that was the whole point of it. You see, if you can't see 'em, the brass can't see 'em not dying. And the Germans? Fritz? He was a better actor than any fella on a stage in London. They knew the score before the first whistle even blew. We'd unleash a volley, those Lee Enfields cracking like 100 whips, and you'd hear 'em scream. Not a real scream of pain, but a stage scream. "Ah, I am hit!" And then you'd see 'em fall over into the frozen mud like a row of bowl. No, like a row of tin soldiers. They'd drop into the slush, hide for a minute until the smoke cleared. And then we'd hear 'em. Well, we'd hear 'em chuckling from the bottom of their trench while they shared a bit of sausage. A circus. A beautiful, desperate, bloodyless circus that shouldn't have been possible. We were shelling empty fields, blowing up nothing but dirt and a few scrubby trees while the inspectors watched through those periscopes, nodding their heads like they were seeing a great victory for the crown. Funny how small things stick with you. I remember seeing a German helmet fly up in the air, just tossed up by hand behind the wire, so the brass would think a direct shell hit had found its mark. We were all in on it, both sides of the wire. A whole battalion of ghosts playing at war just to stay human for one more night. No blood, just the smell of burnt powder and the sound of muffled laughter behind the sandbags. The muzzle flashes lit up the cold. Dark sky like a celebration, aiming at the stars instead of the hearts of men. We weren't winning territory. We were winning seconds. We were winning the right to breathe without killing. The itch of the lice, it seemed to stop for a minute while we played the part. Even the bugs were confused by the noise. But under the thunder, well, you could feel the ice cracking. The machine don't like being lied to for long. And the theater was bound to have its final act. I saw one of the inspectors, a colonel with a mustache that looked like a dead squirrel. He was looking real close at the ground, looking for the stains. You can fake the noise, you can fake the fall, but you can't fake the red. Not for long. The vibration of the guns was shaking the very mud under my boots. But it was a hollow sound, like a drum with nothing inside. We were dancing on the edge of a razor, hoping the brass didn't notice the bullets were hitting the clouds. The taste of the air. It was gray and gritty. And the realization started to sink in that the machine was getting smarter. It was starting to realize the play was a lie. We kept firing until our shoulders were sore, until our ears were ringing so loud we couldn't hear the lieutenant screaming. But we knew. We knew the silence was coming back. And when it did, the machine wouldn't be looking for actors anymore. It'd be looking for victims. I remember looking at Jack. His face was covered in soot, looking like a coal miner. And he just gave me this little sad wink. We were keeping the peace with 1,000 rounds of lead. But the lead was running out. And the general's patience was shorter than his fuse. The cold, it was starting to seep back into our bones. That deep, bone-deep ache that makes you forget your own name. We were just boys playing at murder to save our souls. But the theater, well, the theater was nearly over. Christmas Eve. But there wasn't any peace. Just the frost biting into your cheeks until you couldn't feel your own face. And the smell of wet wool and wood smoke fading. as the machine finally caught on to our little play. They knew. The brass, those cold-eyed fellas with the clipboards and the starched collars back at the chateau, they saw through the smoke, saw the lack of blood in the reports, and they decided it was time for a reset. To them, we were a broken engine that needed a hard kick, a blood sacrifice to get the killin' back on schedule and liven up the maps. The order came down at midnight. No, it was just past 1 in the morning, whispered through the frozen trenches like a sickness that you can't sweat out. Over the top. 0300. Not a raid, not a show, but a slaughter. They wanted us to charge across that frozen slush, that same bitter gray muck where we tossed pumpernickel and shared laughs with the boys in gray just a few days before. I remember looking at Jack. "What's Dowrint?" His breath was huffing out in ragged, desperate clouds of white. And his eyes, well, they were searching for an out that wasn't there, looking at the stars as if they might give him an answer. We had to do it, not because we hated those fellas across the wire. No, we didn't have enough energy left for hate, but because the machine, the real enemy behind us, had its revolvers aimed at our own spines. It's the mundane horror of it. You know, the way you're forced to kill your friends just to keep your own heart thumping for one more miserable day. The vibration of the world seemed to stop, just for a second. As we waited for the signal, the itch of the lice felt like 1,000 tiny needles. And the taste in my mouth, it was like sucking on a rusted nail. Then came the whistle. Fweet! A thin, high-pitched, lonely scream that cut through the winter air like a razor through silk. I can still hear it when the wind blows too hard at night. That shrill, a dying sound that meant the end of our humanity. We climbed out, our boots slipping on the frozen rungs of the ladders, the wood groaning and cracking under the weight of our gear and our fear. The mud, it wasn't just mud anymore. It was a trap of ice and filth. Every step was a wet, heavy, bone-deep thud that vibrated right up to your teeth. We started running. No. We were stumbling, choking, on the cold air that hit our lungs like a mouthful of iron filings. And across the wire, in that jaundiced, flickering light of the flares, we could see 'em. Fritz. They were looking out, waiting for the joke to start, waiting for us to fire high so they could play act their deaths like we'd done a dozen times before. They were even smiling, some of them thinking it was just another act in the theater. But this time, the lead was low. I saw Miller, a kid from Leeds who couldn't have been more than 19. He fired, and I saw a gray tunic across the way. Just fold. No stage scream. No dramatic fall. Just a quiet, heavy, sickening crumple into the slush. The realization. It hit that German trench like a wave of poison gas. You could feel the air turn sour as they realized the theater was over. The moment they knew we'd betrayed the only secret that made the war bearable. The silence of the night was shattered by the real sound of war. Not the loud, performative thunder of a week ago, but the wet, muffled, desperate sounds of steel finding home. We were forced to kill 'em to prove we were still cogs, to prove the machine still owned our souls. It wasn't about taking a hill or winning a trench. It was about destroying the bridge we'd built in the dark. I remember the look on one fella's face. He was younger than Miller, probably had a shaving mirror in his pocket too, as he saw us coming with the bayonets leveled. He didn't even reach for the cold rifle at first, and he just looked confused, like he was waiting for the punchline of a joke that had gone on too long. But there wasn't one. Just the vibration of our own artillery starting to roar behind us. A massive ras drum roll of fire meant to cover up the error of our piece. The machine was grinding us all up, turning our pity into grease for the gears. We were screaming as we ran. Not because we were brave, but because we were trying to drown out the sound of our own hearts breaking. The smell of the cordite, it wasn't sharp and clean no more. It smelled like a butcher's shop at the end of a long, hot day. We reached their line, and it was a reset, all right. A reset back into the blind. Stupid, senseless hate that the brass needed to keep the maps colored in. The stars, they just watched, cold and indifferent, while we tore out the last bit of light we had left in that hellhole. Funny how the taste of the air changes when the killing gets real. It gets thick, oily, like you're inhaling the very life you're taking away. We were functioning perfectly now, smooth, efficient, and dying inside with every pull of the trigger. The machine was happy. The reports would finally show the blood it craved, and the only thing left of our secret civilization was the echo of a whistle fading into the frost, and the sound of bodies hitting the mud. A reminder that the individual, well, he don't stand a chance once the butcher decides the play has to end. I can still feel the vibration of that charge in my boots. A heavy, rhythmic thud that tells me the machine never really stops. It just waits for the next set of cogs to think they're human. The guns. They finally quit screaming. And what's left ain't the victory the chateaus were promising. It's just this hollow, ringing silence that eats at your ears. The machine, well, it got what it wanted. It got its reset. The reports are all filled out now, neat and tidy. Plenty of red ink to satisfy the ledger men in their warm offices. The mud, it's thick, black, smells of copper and rotten wool and that sharp, turnip-like stink of the trenches after a hard rain. Just the wind now, huffing through the rusted wire. Sounds like a ghost trying to remember a song it once knew. You walk through what's left of the battalion, and you don't see heroes. You just see the leftovers of a life that wasn't meant to be lived in a hole. Stale rations, half-eaten, soaking in the slush, looking like gray paste, and the lice. Well, they're still busy. The only ones left with any work to do in this graveyard. Funny how small things stick with you, like a single tin button lying in the dirt, glinting in the gray light like a lost eye. You can still feel the vibration in your boots, a ghost of the artillery that's moved on to the next sector, the next set of cogs to grind up. But then, you see it over there, leaning against a support timber that's half shattered from a mortar. No, it was a the cold rifle, a Lee Enfield. Just a hunk of wood and steel sitting there in the muck, looking lonely. You pick it up. It's heavy, cold, enough to make your hands ache right down to the bone. And the wood is waterlogged, heavy with the weight of the winter. You open the bolt, clack, clack. The sound is too loud, too sharp in all that quiet. You look down the barrel, and your heart, well, it just, it skips a beat. It's clean, silver, shining like a mirror in the dark. Not a speck of soot, not a grain of carbon, no burnt powder to sting your eyes or foul the steel. The man who carried this, he watched the machine turn its teeth on him. He heard the whistles and the screams, and he refused. He didn't pull the trigger, not even when the revolvers were at his back. He didn't fire at the boy in the undershirt. He didn't fire when the order came to reset the hate. He chose the mud. He chose to go out into the dark as an individual, keeping his soul when everything else was being ground into grease. For the gears, the rain, it's starting again. A slow, miserable drizzle that tastes of smoke and iron on the tongue. It washes over the steel, over that clean, impossibly bright barrel. And you realize that some secrets, well, they're too heavy for the maps to carry. He's gone. They're all gone. But that the cold rifle, it just sits there, looking at you with that bright silver eye. A reminder that in the middle of all this rot, there was one man who wouldn't be part of the machine. The wind. It's picking up, rattling a dented tin mug against a rock. And all you can think about is the cold, the endless, bone-deep cold. And that barrel, white and pure in the filth, a ghost of a piece that never had a chance, left to sink into the black, waiting for the mud to take it all back home.